Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Selling a little or a lot? Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your own online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage? Shopify's there to help you grow. Shopify helps you turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout. 36% better on average compared to the other leading commerce platforms. Because businesses that grow, grow with Shopify. Get a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/promo. Shopify.com/promo.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. And Kieran, normally at this stage we make a little joke about the fact we've just spent a lot of time in each other's company, and how are you, etc, etc. But of course everybody knows that because we discussed how you are on the pod which we recorded 15 seconds ago. But unfortunately you weren't with me for this, Kieran, because it's an interview pod. And it's an interview with Tim Williams, who's the chief executive of Oxford United. And it's a really interesting, honest interview, which I think not only Oxford fans, but football fans everywhere, a lot of what he says will resonate. There's some apologies in there as well, in with the congratulations on what a brilliant job Oxford have been doing the last couple of years. But I do wish you were here, Kieran, because when we interviewed, I'm fine when we're interviewing fans, I'm great, but when we're interviewing grown-ups like Tim Williams, I get a bit antsy, and I do a lot of intelligent nodding in the bits where I'd normally go, well, I'll just hand over to Kieran here while he talks about this financial reallocation you've just mentioned. So I know you've had time to listen to it, Kieran, but it's not the same without you. But anyway, this is what Tim Williams had to say about life, love, and the universe. Tim, thank you so much for joining us today. I've been really looking forward to talking to you, to be honest, not just because you seem like a very nice chap, but because I'm so used to interviewing people when their clubs are in trouble. So unless you're about to drop a terrible bombshell, this should be a nice, upbeat interview, hopefully. And before we talk about what's been a brilliant summer for you, tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey to Oxford United, because you have some illustrious clubs on your CV already, don't you?
Well, firstly, Kevin, thanks for the invitation to come and speak on this. It's something, I've been following Kieran's work for many, many years, and it's a real honour and a pleasure to be here. And yeah, the good news story is something that I do want to talk about. And thank you for referring to me as a nice chap. It's not so often I get that. The journey's been kind of crazy, really, and I think reasonably well documented, but I think always worth kind of pinching myself from time to time in terms of how I got here. And yeah, I've got some illustrious names on my CV, but that's been with some real hard work and real determination. I love football. I've loved football ever since I was growing up, and one of the key drivers for me was when I was 21, 22 years old. Football was one of the businesses that I wanted to work in, but never thought I would. And via a kind of circuitous route of becoming a chartered accountant, working for a large UK-listed PLC, and then going to work for a large global ad agency, I finally landed a job in 2009 as Group Financial Controller, Head of Finance, whatever you want to call it, for Manchester United. And they were actually really interesting times to be there, that 2009 to 2015 period, because those weren't the years of unbridled success. They were the years when, following 2013 and David and Sir Alex moving aside, that things became a little bit difficult. And I think we saw really the kind of the rough with the smooth, that you have this incredible success, and then you see that, I wouldn't say slipping away, but you then have to pivot and think, well, how do we deal with the fact that in the 2013 season, or 2014 season, should I say, we didn't finish in the Champions League places, which, on a revenue point of view for a club like that was a 50, 60 million swing. So how do you deal with that? How do you manage that? I think then, 5 years and 5 really great years at Manchester United, where I learned an enormous amount about the industry, an enormous amount about the business of football as well as the sport itself. Moved over to Milan for 5 odd years as the chief financial officer of Inter Milan, which I was only saying this to somebody the other day, that I must have driven to the San Siro, 150 times in my career over there, and not once did I get bored of turning the corner and seeing the red girders and pinching myself, thinking, well, how did this kind of working class lad from Wakefield manage to land a job here? And again, though, that was in many ways a lesson for turning a club around. And I was part of a senior management team there that in 2015 was really trying to turn Inter Milan back to where it should have been. So after winning the Champions League final and the tripletta, the treble in 2010, Inter fell on, I wouldn't say fell on hard times, but the success kind of ebbed away between 2010 and 2014. And what we had to do as a group of people and as a real collaborative group was go in there and try and turn it around and try and professionalise it, get through a financial fair play settlement agreement, which really, really wasn't easy. And also make sure that we had the right people in the room making the right decisions. And that's kind of led me to, in many ways, well, totally led me to where I am now and what I've done there, because the learning curve there was also huge. I joke about this, but not so much, that we had 8, 9, 10 people around a table on that famous summer in 2015 when we all first joined, and we were a really new team. And I won't say we looked at each other and went, oh my God, we don't actually know what we're doing. What we actually did was, and it's like we were so invested in that. It was like we were running our own business, and it was absolutely amazing to be there, because to some extent, we did know what we were doing because we were all experts in our field, but we were all learning from each other. And it was such a brilliant collaborative effort for those kind of initial couple of years as we've really got on our feet and got the wheels moving. So it was an amazing time to be there. And actually, to see the culmination of that in Inter becoming a Champions League club again in 2017-2018 season. And then actually shortly after I moved back to England in early 2021 to see them lift the title. That's the culmination of an awful lot of hard work. And a lot of people have said to me since, do you wish you'd have been around there? Do you wish you'd have been around there to lift the trophy as well? And actually the answer is no, because for me, this is not about me. Inter Milan will have forgotten who Tim Williams was. But for me, it's that personal knowledge of the part I played in getting the club to where it is now. And I actually noticed something on social media the other day that I think they're now one of the top 10 sporting brands in Europe, if not the world. And to have just been a small part of that was an enormous privilege. And it's something that I will always hold dear in terms of that satisfaction that I was part of something really, really great there. And that turns me on now to the journey I'm on now with Oxford United. And I was asked, just about 2 years ago now to take the position, and it was an absolute pleasure, privilege to be part of what has been such an amazing club and a historic club as well. And it may not have had the success of Man United and the potential of Inter Milan, but that club has got enormous potential. There is a real heart in that club that you can see from day one. That doesn't mean it doesn't need a bit of restructuring, a bit of, professionalising, for want of a better expression, and a little bit of kind of growth and belief. But what I went into there was a club with real heart and real passion. And I think it probably took me watching the being part of the open top bus parade when we won the playoff final in May. There was it was a bit of a light bulb moment for me. And I think it's very important I say this, that having not lived in Oxford, having not really known too much about the city or the county before I moved here in 2022, I don't think I did fully appreciate what it meant to the people of Oxford. I don't think I did fully embrace what the history of that club meant and how people held it really close to their hearts, and not held it close to their hearts because they had unrivaled success, but quite the opposite, that they held it close to their hearts because it was a club that I think for too long had been unloved. And what I saw and what I have seen since, and I hope this isn't kind of going off piste a little bit too much, but I think it's important I say this. And having spoke to people at our supporters panel and also one of our supporters organisations, Oxvox, some really good people work there, and you see just how much they care about the club. And not care because they just want to be fans, but care about protecting the club and what we as a group of people are doing with it. And that is a massive responsibility, and one that nobody in the club takes lightly, least of all me, because that's the kind of, and again, you'll hear this all the time, I imagine, Kevin, because we all say this because it's true, that whole custodian concept about football. And that is, we've got the best jobs in the world. There is a huge privilege in working in football. But I see some fans criticising people here at the club, myself included. We'll be here long after you've gone. And it's absolutely true. The fans, the city of Oxford, will be here much longer after I have left the club, because I won't be at the club forever. I'm not getting any younger. I will leave the club at some point, and I will retire at some point. And the fans will take on what we left behind. And all I can do, and all we can do as a team, is make sure that we leave the club in a much better place than what we found it. And that's the measure of success. And that's what we all have to do.
It's a strange city, Tim, Oxford. It's a city I know well. Not, I hasten to add, because I went there to university before people start jumping on my credentials, but because my wife used to work at the Playhouse. And it's just because people assume that people out in the rest of the country, just as they do with London, assume that Oxford is a very wealthy town, very wealthy city, which to an extent it is. But it's also got a very large working class hinterland, for want of a better word. It's got economic problems, some of which are worse than the rest of the country. And they tend to be the people that support the town. I know quite a few Oxford United fans who it's a real mark of defiance. It's because they see Oxford as being Inspector Morse and tourists, when to them Oxford is a proper working class community, and the football club is what represents that for them.
I think I think that is one of the real kind of learning points and learning curves that you go on when you come to this city, because yes, to everybody, Oxford is universally famous, but unfortunately, for us as a club and for our fans, it's universally famous pretty much for one thing, and we do want to change that, and I think we are slowly changing that. But fundamentally, Oxford University, or should I say the University of Oxford, is so tied into the identity of the city. It's even in our, we even have it in our kind of 5 key idents for the club, and that's right that it's right that we nod to that. But we also, in our idents to the club, nod to the mini plant in Cowley. We nod to the Headington Shark, because they're important landmarks. I drive past on the way to the training ground this vast mini plant in Cowley, where I imagine a significant proportion of our fans actually work. And that is not Oxford University. That is Oxford. We drive through Littlemore and Cowley and Blackbird Leys on our way between the stadium and the training ground. And that's, for me, that's where our core fan base is. And that gives us also a different sense of responsibility as well. And that is, we talk here about, Lee's legacy. Recently we've just set up a fund whereby we will donate, I think, £10,000 to local community organisations for the furtherance of their community. It lends itself to what we are able to do for the purposes of building our new stadium, which is really concentrate on the local community, albeit a different community. But in moving away, and we'll talk about the stadium, I imagine, soon, but in moving away from the stadium where it currently is to where we want it to be, we are not forgetting where our current stadium is and the population around there, and we will continue to invest in that area and protect it because, yes, Kevin, Oxford is so much more than the university, and for us that is something that we continually drive. That doesn't mean that the university and Oxford Brookes University and the educational establishments around it are not places that we can collaborate with and learn from and frankly try and get some supporters from. But we can't forget what the roots of our club are. We will never forget that.
We will talk about the stadium, of course, but first of all, your summer. Congratulations on promotion to the Championship via a very impressive Wembley win. Always, if you're guaranteed to win the playoff, that's the best way to go up. But you said on the pitch just
it was a wonderful way to go up, Kevin. It was amazing. It was
played
the
so
most
well
incredible day and superb
Bolton,
performance.
Yeah, Bolton were strong favourites, weren't they? But you said on the pitch minutes after the final whistle that the next few weeks are going to be a lot of cold towels on heads. Did it play out like that?
Yeah, very much so. Again, going back to what I was talking about Oxford and the city, and we mentioned the bus parade. Over 30,000 people from the city of Oxford went to Wembley that day.
Yeah.
That was incredible to see. And I think I said this maybe after the game. They talk about Dortmund's yellow wall. Well, I saw the yellow wall at Wembley that day, and I will never forget that day and how incredible that support was. And it was just truly inspirational. But yeah, cold towels, and it's still cold towel, to be honest. It's the challenges of going from League One to Championship are not just about recruiting a few new players. It's about how we change our mindset as a club. And again, it's changing the mindset as a club, but without losing sight of what brought us here and the people that brought us to where we are. Yes, it's the first time in 25 years that we've played in the second tier of English football, but it's been 25 years in the making through a series of massive ups and downs, through a playoff final in 2020 where we narrowly missed out on going to the second tier. So there has been a huge journey and a raft of people who have got us to where we are, some of whom are still with the club, Mick Brown, Peter Rhodes Brown, and some of whom are no longer with the club but still had their part to play. People like Chris Williams, Neil McWilliams, and to name but two, who had their part to play in where that club is now, whether it be the training ground improvements, whether it's where we are, whether it's continuing with the stadium project. And that's part of the journey. But speaking with our head of safety and operations, speaking with our kind of stadium guys, there's a lot to do at the stadium. We do an enormous refurb operation at the stadium now just to get us Championship ready. We're moving from, I think, 1 camera to 6 cameras for the new Sky deal. That's a lot of work in order to cable it. It's a lot of work in order to find the pictures for the cameras. It's a lot of work in order to work out where potentially camera kills are going to go. And that's boring stuff, but it needs doing. We've got to invest considerable amounts of money in new floodlights because the regulations on floodlights in Championship are very different to those in League One. And it's really important that, we'll be on TV a lot more this season than we've ever been. Partly down to the new broadcasting deal from the Football League, but partly because, let's face it, we're the minnows versus the giants. Our first game is Norwich City, huge club. Yeah. We've got Leeds away to Leeds on the 21st of December. We look down that list of the 24 clubs in the Championship and think, we look and think, well, where are the easy games? There are no easy games. There's no games where you think, I'll pick up 3 points there. Every game is going to be tough. And so that means, we need to make sure that on and off the pitch, we're absolutely ready for it. And, we are probably not playing catch up, but I think possibly in the earlier part of the season, maybe February, March, I don't think we were counting on being promoted, even though the manager and the coaching staff were, kept telling me we could be promoted and we would be promoted. But it took us really until the 18th of May to know that that was actually going to happen. So I wouldn't say we were on the back foot, but there was an awful lot of work to do in order to catch up. And I think that's really important. And I think, we've already announced some really key appointments in the sporting side. So, we've upskilled in the sporting side. So Ed Waldron, our previous head of recruitment, is now our head of football operations for the men's first team. We've now got a head of football development in our previous head of academy, Stevie Kinneborough. Wow. So we're already recognising that we have to step up as an organisation in order to compete in what is, I think, the third most attended league in Europe, which is a staggering statistic when you think about it, that Oxford United will be playing in the third most attended league in Europe and probably the fifth or sixth most viewed league globally. I mean, it's a mind-blowing concept that's the league that we're going to be playing in next season. I'm very proud that we are, of course, but it means a lot of hard work to keep those standards continuing and continuing and continuing.
Well, it's a difficult financial balancing act, isn't it? Because come February, March, when your playing staff are telling you we could be promoted, then the temptation there is to start to invest in the new upgrades to floodlights and broadcasting positions, etc. But then if you don't go up, you've spent a lot of money on something that you may not need for 5 more seasons, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, look, when we knew after the game away at Exeter that we were going to be in the semi-finals of the playoffs, of course, our minds turned to planning for the final and potentially for promotion. So, it would have been very silly of us to not think and not have our heads in that way. Both in terms of the player recruitment side and what we would have to do in summer, but also in terms of the infrastructure of the stadium. And certainly there were improvements that we were already planning for that eventuality. And whether we were promoted or not, we would have done them. So, things like changing dugouts, improving the changing rooms, improving the away dressing room, just making sure that for the time we are going to be at that stadium, it is the best it can possibly be. Even only last summer, we put a brand new pitch in the stadium at significant cost. Even though we're moving away, it was the right thing to do. And the number of people have come to me and said from the sporting side, that made a huge difference for our home games this season, actually having a brand new pitch. So all of those things all kind of contribute to the improvements that were made and the kind of trajectory that we were on. But yeah, it's, we're working flat out, genuinely, absolutely flat out. I think some of the team that we've got at the stadium at the moment are just running on fumes at the moment, and they're doing an extraordinary job to try and get that place ready for the 10th and some of the pre-seasons as well.
The IKEA Business Network is now open for small businesses and entrepreneurs. Join for free today to get access to interior design services to help you make the most of your workspace, employee well-being benefits to help you and your people grow, and amazing discounts on travel, insurance, and IKEA purchases, deliveries, and more. Take your small business to the next level when you sign up for the IKEA Business Network for free today by searching IKEA Business Network.
How do you feel great on vacation? Like really good? Easy. You go to Aruba. You'll spend your time relaxing on cool white sand beaches and floating in healing blue water. You'll immerse yourself in natural wonder and find your center on an island where things move at your speed. You won't just feel great, you'll feel relaxed, renewed, and ready for life. That's the Aruba effect. Plan your trip at aruba.com.
You described the playoff final as a £10 million game. Have you revised that figure upwards? Because it seems to me that it's probably worth a lot more than that, the move to the Championship. Have you enjoyed having a big new budget to work with?
I think there is a bigger budget to work with. That budget has been agreed with our shareholders. I was in Jakarta only 3 or 4 weeks ago to take them through what that budget looked like and what it meant. I was there with our chairman, Grant. It we're not quite in Alan Sugar prune juice territory, but we're probably not a million miles off. And I don't mean that in any cynical way, and I think there's a couple of things that are really important to remember here. Things that we looked at, things that we wanted to do, but probably were just not financially viable. One was we did genuinely look at putting a fourth stand in. Right. Because obviously, famously, our stadium only has 3 sides and we have an empty car park side. We did an awful lot of work, a hell of a lot of work to assess the financial feasibility of doing that. And unfortunately, it would have resulted in the club losing money had we done it, even though there were potential benefits to larger crowds, atmosphere. We just couldn't justify financially making that work. It just didn't work financially. I would have loved it to have worked financially. Genuinely, I would, but it just didn't work. But also, a lot of the investment is also looking at what we're doing off the pitch as well. So we are not just throwing money at footballing staff, even though our budgets are going to have to be competitive in that league. We're not in a position where we're going to get promoted and we want to, and we're expecting to get relegated. We are going to put a squad together that expects to stay in that league, and that does require additional investment. But we're also investing quite heavily in the training ground as well to make that an even better facility. Unfortunately, we had a disastrous flood there on the 6th of January this year. And it is, we've done an awful lot of work to get up and running as to what we have as a bit of a makeshift facility at the moment, albeit a very good makeshift facility. But we are hoping to invest quite a bit to make that training ground real championship quality. And we're looking into all options, whether it's this year or next year, to do that. So yeah, the budgets are higher. The operational budgets, i.e. what we are spending to just run the club and run the stadium, are not significantly higher. I've been given, cost control measures from our ownership to say, don't, spend money like it's your own on, off the pitch, in order that, frankly, we can invest money on the pitch, because, every pound of money we save in, operating expenses can be invested on the pitch. And that is the overall goal, that we want to make sure that we've got a side which is more than competitive in the league that we're going to be in next season.
You've mentioned this already, Tim. You've got 2 massive games to start. You're at home to Norwich, then you're away to Coventry on the Friday. Both games live on Sky for all to see.
Yeah.
What do you make of the sheer number of EFL games that will be available to Sky viewers this season, and how much of a difference has that new broadcasting deal made to a club like you, not just in the Championship, but if you were still in League One?
I think in the Championship, and we can probably talk for another hour on the distribution model between Championship, League One and League Two, and I'm not going to kind of go too deeply into that. Obviously, the new broadcasting deal this year for the next 4 years, I think is quite extraordinary in the uptick that we've got. I think like for like, a Championship club might be getting 2 to 3 million more this year than the equivalent club would have got last year. Obviously, the Championship being the premier product in the Football League takes the lion's share of that uptick, but certainly it's being passed down to League One and League Two, and there are significant benefits coming through to League One and League Two. And again, we can probably then currently park the current discussion on Premier League redistributions, which is, disappointingly still on the table rather than resolved, sorted off the table and money in bank. So I think that's, not been particularly a happy scenario, which is something that we are trying very hard to resolve, those of us who are kind of involved in that area in the Football League. What do I think about the number of games that are going to be shown on TV? Frankly, and I know that there is a debate about this in terms of how it affects people actually attending the stadiums. For me, eyeballs, whether they are eyeballs physically in the stadium or eyeballs on TV, are all good. I welcome the fact that we are going to be televised more, because it gives us a chance to showcase what we are, who we are, what we can do. I think there are huge benefits when we have televised home games, again, just commercially and boringly, from the fact that more people are going to be watching it for digiboards, more people are going to be watching sponsorship logos when we eventually get one. Like many other clubs, we're still out in the market. Certainly, as I'm speaking right now. So I really welcome it. I accept that there are some issues over changing kickoff times. Obviously, our game at Coventry on the 16th is an 8 p.m. kickoff on a Friday rather than a 3 p.m. on a Saturday. Our game against Norwich is a 12:30. And again, I think it's worked in the Premier League, and I think, generally speaking, it's reasonably adaptable. I think most of our fans should be reasonably adaptable to the changing kickoff times, and actually can see some benefit from it. You know, for those people who can't make it to a weekend game, well, a Friday night game actually is quite attractive, and it leaves the weekend free. You know, a 12:30 kickoff on a Saturday can leave the rest of the Saturday afternoon free to do other things if that's what you want to do. So I think there are going to be benefits, but again, you can't please everybody. But I think the fact that we're going to get more eyeballs on Oxford United can only be a good thing for me.
I'm just slightly bemused by the idea that 12:30 kickoff leaves you with other things to do in the afternoon. It just leaves you with more time in the pub to do in the afternoon, Tim, is what it does.
Well, that's a fair point, yeah.
Basically. Before we talk about the stadium, Tim, I'm particularly keen to ask you, and this seems odd, asking this question to somebody who's worked at Inter Milan to Man United, but I'm interested in the learning curve when you go to a club like Oxford United, because even before the playoff final, I read an interview that you gave to Oxford fans, and you were talking about how successful things had been already. You'd had record revenues the season before that. The women's team was going really well. The academy were going really well. You started a business club. The community schemes were very successful. But at the same time, you had Football League sanctions. There are other things going. So it seems that you had both a very successful first year and a slightly difficult first year. So how was that for you? Did it seem like it was an unqualified success to you?
No, and I think that's a really interesting point you make. It was a year of dramatic highs and actually some quite colossal lows, if I'm being honest. Lows being, the fact that our training ground flooded on the 6th of January and the whole bottom of the building was frankly completely destroyed. I mean, it was devastating. And having to dust yourself down and work out what needed to be done in order to get a professional football team back into training as quickly as possible was a Herculean effort, and it was genuinely one of the most devastating things I've seen, and we are still suffering the impacts of that now. I actually think the speed at which we got that recovered helped in terms of the running for the season, because it was almost like that kind of, I hate to say, it's kind of Dunkirk spirit that we were like all mucking in, but then quickly fatigue set in as to how we were managing in such makeshift facilities. So it was very important to get the marquee up that we've got and that up and running and working. But it was an enormous, enormous headache. And huge revenues. But what was happening, and unfortunately, you don't always see this until, I wouldn't say until it's too late, but until you're in the middle of it, which is, I said this earlier, that a lot of our people even now are still running on fumes. And it was relentless. That period of time, probably from the beginning of April through to the end of May, was everybody was working absolutely flat out in the club. Everybody. There wasn't one day when we weren't all in and all invested in what was going on and off the pitch. And I think it probably made me realise at the time, and probably subsequently since, that when you layer on the issues that we had to deal with, be it the flood, be it, a little bit of a dip in performance in January and February, maybe as a result of the flood, maybe not, the then potential to go to the playoff semi-finals, planning for the semi-finals, planning for Wembley, winning Wembley, planning after that, then realising that we were a championship club and everything that had to be done. And you cannot assemble more staff that quickly to do what needed to be done. And, I freely admit that mistakes were made. You can't hide away from those mistakes. And I think it's an important point that, at its grassroots level, we are, let's be honest about this. Most people who saw our financial statements last year know that we are a loss-making SME. Now, we're also a loss-making SME that every single decision we make, every single mistake that is made, and we make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. Every business makes mistakes. Unfortunately, when you're in a football club, they are for everybody to see. They are public property and public knowledge. Everybody in that club and everybody I know works incredibly hard. And one thing got dropped, and you mentioned the EFL sanction. I do want to talk specifically about that. I mean, it's well documented. The documentation is public knowledge, which you can argue whether that's right or that's wrong. The fine is public knowledge. That fine was paid, but it was an isolated administrative error. And I'm going to say this now. I am sorry that happened. It should not have happened, but it did. What it means is that we just put even more resilience into the system afterwards. The problem with football often is that you don't get a chance to learn from your mistakes because it is all out there and it's all out there to be criticised, and that's fine. Again, we are the most privileged people in the world to do the jobs that we do, but it is not easy. And, I think whatever job you have in any football club, be it a National League side, be it a top Premier League side, it's incredibly demanding. These are 24/7 jobs. These are lifestyle jobs. These are not jobs that you can do from 9 to 5, 4 days a week. It's impossible. So you have to be all in. And we are all in. But there is so much out there in terms of mistakes that are made or just decisions that are made that are disagreed with by whoever. It's such an obvious thing to say you can't please all of the people all of the time, but it's true, you can't. But the problem that you have in football, and this is a very serious issue. I mean, this podcast is called The Price of Football. I actually think it's really important to talk about the cost of football, because the cost of football can be, to everybody who's working in there, incredibly difficult. And it's incredibly costly when you are out there exposed, when you are doing the best job that you possibly can. And it's, we look at this, you just mentioned it, record revenues, the club promoter for the first time in 25 years. We've sold more season tickets this season than we've ever sold. And yet it still sometimes seems out there that we're not doing enough. And that's fine. We want to be pushed. We want to continue to be better. I'm the first one to say that Oxford United's best season hasn't happened yet, because I firmly believe that, because of what we're doing right now to make this club better and better and better. And believe me, I want Oxford United's best season to happen when I've gone, because I want that club to continue to grow and continue to be amazing. But all I ask for from everybody involved in football, be it the regulators, be it, everybody who is involved, be it with our stadium project, be it everywhere, the fact that, no, we are not going to get everything right. We are going to make mistakes. We are going to make decisions which are not universally popular. But what I can say, and what I will say, is that where we make mistakes, we learn, adapt, and change. Where we make decisions, they are always made with the best interests of the club and their fans at heart. I can promise that from the bottom of my heart.
In a strange sort of way then, Tim, listening to you answer that very honestly, thank you. In a strange sort of way though, are mistakes that you make at a club like Oxford more visible than perhaps they would be in Milan or in Manchester, because those mistakes are being made at a much more corporate level where people may not get to and you're managing a club in a much smaller community where word gets out. So in a way, you almost have to be more open, don't you? Because people will find out in Oxford quicker than they will find out in Milan, maybe.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, and that is something we are aware of. I think, and look, this is not me either shirking any form of accountability for these things as well. Look, again, I'm going to be very honest with you. When that potential EFL sanction came through, that was a difficult day with my chairman. Genuinely. That, these are not easy conversations to have.
Yeah.
And Grant, as our chairman, is huge on accountability. And so we're accountable to every stakeholder that we have. And I think you're right. When you have 5,500 season ticket holders, it's a much smaller population of people, and the people individually. We have direct communication with our fans, and I love that about being a smaller football club, that we can walk out of the stadium and talk to the fans. There's no, I don't hide away. I know people think I do because I was away on holiday or whatever, but I don't hide away. I'm visible at the stadium, and I like to be visible at the stadium. Yeah. I don't want to hide away. I'm there, and everybody in the club is there. But that also comes at a cost. There is an accountability there and we do recognise it, and that's why we, again, try and not always succeed to have really open communication. But it's, we never get the balance right. Again, can't please everybody all the time. So we don't always get the balance right, but we always strive to make sure that where there's something to say, we will say it.
Let's move on to the new stadium then, finally, Tim. You're planning this move. Firstly, tell us why you have to move, and tell us why it's so important. You described this move recently as crucial to the club's future and a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
It absolutely is crucial. I mean, look, the reality is, and it's been well documented by many people, is that the licence on the current stadium runs out in summer 2026, and there is no opportunity to renew. So technically, from summer 2026, we don't have a stadium to play in. We have nothing. And that has meant over the past 3, 4, 5 years, acknowledge that is likely to happen, and a more acceleration of that knowledge that it's likely to happen, and a very, very diligent search for a site for that new stadium. You mentioned earlier about Oxford, Kevin, and Oxford is an incredibly difficult place to find pieces of land, because most of them are owned by colleges of the university, and if they're not, they're greenbelt, and so it's extraordinarily difficult to find a plot of land. We managed to, through an enormous amount of hard work by those people who were involved, and that land option has been granted to us. But there's another bigger point here about the stadium, and that is, perversely, a lot of people ask me, how can it make sense financially to be spending north of £130 million on a brand new stadium when you are at that time we were 8-9 million revenue League One club, potentially 17-18 million pound Championship club that makes losses, and that's absolutely factually correct. The issue is that the money we can make from the stadium that we are currently in, and the opportunities for growing that commercially, are so little that perversely it is that very fact that makes this financially viable to do. If we were able to monetize the Kassam Stadium 365 days a year, it probably wouldn't make financial sense to move to a new stadium. Because we can't, because we only really have a license to use that stadium on home match days plus a couple of extras, the options to monetize it are really limited. And I remember saying this on a podcast, or an interview I did not long after I joined, that in League One at the time, we were, 8,000 people, 9,000 people coming to the stadium every Saturday, compared to Bolton, Ipswich, Portsmouth, Derby, who were regularly getting, between 20 and 30,000 people coming to the stadium. That is a vast difference in terms of your ability to actually spend on the pitch and spend on infrastructure. And so this is why not only is there this existential threat to our club because we don't have a stadium and therefore the need to have a stadium, But it's only when we actually move into that stadium will we be really able to actually commercialise and to make money from that stadium 365 days a year. And that is why it's so important. We build a 16,000 seater stadium as hopefully still a championship club, and we get, 95% full capacity each week. That is a considerable amount more money that can be spent on infrastructure, on the team, on the squad, and on the training ground. This is all about what we're going to do in order to invest for the future of this club. And that's why building the stadium is so important. But also, that's why getting the financing structure of that build is also incredibly important. Because, I would never sit here and say that debt is a dirty word, because we will have to, and we've publicly said this, we will have to finance that stadium by a mixture of equity and debt, the ratios of which are still being discussed. But we want to, nobody will lend us unsustainable debt. We will not take on unsustainable debt. That's an absolute no-no from my point of view.
Just interested, Tim, in several things. First of all, where we are with planning permission, how the council are feeling. Secondly, I was really interested in the very strict parameters that were put on the search. The site had to be 9.4 acres at least big. Sustainable transport mode had to be close by. So you're already narrowing your options in a very limited field. And thirdly, I was interested in whether you're leasing or buying. So
just to take those in reverse order, we are leasing, but on an exceptionally long lease. I think it's 250 years. Look, in our lifetimes, in many people's future lifetimes, to all intents and purposes, it's like buying that land. In terms of the strict parameters around that site, that's actually very site specific. Had we been able to secure a brownfield site, we would probably not have had to deal with such a onerous, if for want of a better word, stringent set of conditions. It's because of the very fact that, frankly, the only site we were able to find was a greenfield site and greenbelt land, is that in order to allow us to build on greenbelt land, we have to have what are called exceptional circumstances. And in order to meet those exceptional circumstances, there are certain tests that we have to fulfill in order to be able to be granted the ability to build on that land. So that is sustainable transport, it's bike hubs, it's biodiversity gains, it's making sure that we are, I suppose it's making sure that we're good corporate citizens in that area. It's traffic measures. It's making sure that it causes as least disruption to the area as a new stadium possibly can. In terms of planning permission, I think that is now early next year where we will expect a planning decision. And so we've got to get building pretty damn quickly once that's been done.
Have you, this has been with the new government and their plans to build on Greenbelt site. Have you had local opposition? Are there people who don't want the ground in their back garden?
Yeah, unsurprisingly, yes. And we are very understanding of that. We get it. What we're trying to do and what we are doing here is building a stadium that we hope will be beneficial to the area, rather, additive to the local community rather than reductive to the local community. So, accepting the fact that there will be, issues over transport and parking, we are actively working with the local authority to ensure that we are minimising the number of cars that go to the stadium, putting additional bus routes on, train routes on. It's right next door to Oxford Parkway train station, which gives us absolutely fantastic connectivity. We're putting hundreds of bike spaces in there, and we're making walking routes available as well. So we want to make sure that we keep traffic down to a minimum, but we accept there will be traffic going there, and it's up to us to work with the local authorities to ensure that is kept to a bare minimum. In terms of the impact on the local area, one of the things that we're very, very passionate about is making the stadium a 365-day-a-year community hub. So that means, community health centres, drop-in centres, possibly a gym. Obviously, there's a hotel there which is going to have conferencing facilities, and also just making sure that it is a place where people actually want to spend their time. Because currently, that piece of land, if I'm being honest, is unused, and it's a bit of scrubland. If I'm not being too insulting about the piece of land there, what we want to do is make that a really usable, exciting, attractive community hub.
I can't tell you, Tim, how pleased I am to hear you use those words, because people at Palace, I'm getting used to it now. When I turn up to things at Palace, I'm getting used to the fact that they all disappear, because I bang on about it all the time. Selhurst Park should be a hub for the community. There are people with all sorts of problems. If you've got old people who are lonely, they should be able to go to Selhurst Park. If you've got older men who don't want to see their GP, they should be able to go to Selhurst Park. So I'm really pleased to hear you say that. Tim, I really appreciate your time today. If you don't mind, I'd like to finish with two general football questions. One takes us right back to the start of our interview. I'm really interested to learn whether on a day-to-day basis, working with an Italian club is different to working with an English club, with Manchester United, or is it that the fact that the two clubs are so massive makes it a very similar experience?
I actually think working for all three clubs is genuinely a very similar experience.
Oh, okay.
Because what you've got to think about is what are the objectives of a football club? To do the best we can on the pitch, to play attractive, exciting football for our fans so that they want to come to the stadium and watch it, and make that stadium the best experience we can possibly make it. And everything around that, everything you do, whether you're Man United, Inter Milan or Oxford United, is around making that match day experience the best it possibly can be. And that means, unashamedly, we want to sell sponsorship. Why? Because we want to invest in the stadium and we want to invest in the team. Everybody in football talks about that virtuous circle, but it's everybody talks about it because it's true. We want to make sure that what we do on the pitch, whether you're, so Inter Milan and Man United want to afford, want to buy, and want to invest in the best players. So do we. That is exactly what we want to do as a football club as well. The dynamics are absolutely identical. You just have fewer zeros on the end of the numbers and probably fewer staff around to do it. So the staff, with the greatest respect, probably work a bit harder at the smaller clubs.
That's really interesting. And almost finally, we know now, Tim, that the new government is committed to the Football Governance Bill and the independent regulator. Are you happy with that? Are there any changes you'd like to see added to the bill to make your life easier as a CEO of a championship club?
Do you know, I think we do, and the Football League itself does welcome the independent regulator. And I think but the narrative here is always there shouldn't have to be a regulator, but sadly there has to be a regulator because, there hasn't been a broad agreement on how funding should be distributed around the pyramid. And the pyramid is so important. You can't get away from the fact that without the football pyramid, there isn't football in this country in the way that we want to have football. Yeah, we could have an MLS type system where it's a closed league and nobody gets relegated, but I don't think anybody in this country would want that. So I think we need to recognise the fact that the smaller clubs from Championship down provide not just an integral role in the development of football in this country, but an integral role in the development of our communities and the fans who go to that stadium. Our fans are so passionate about Oxford United. They deserve to be heard just as much as a fan of Tottenham Hotspur, Man United, Man City. More so, in fact, because that's the real heart of what football is in this country. What would I like to see in terms of the regulator? One of the criticisms that I have, and a lot of football clubs have to go down this route, unfortunately, to great cost, is that, and I speak as, by my profession, I'm a finance guy. But one of the frustrating things I see in the lower leagues, particularly League One and League Two, is that there is so little accessibility for structured, efficient, inexpensive financing options. The reality is that we're building a stadium, and I'm going to talk specifically here about the stadium. We're building a stadium which is going to be game-changing for our club, but also game-changing for our county and possibly even for the country, that we will have a stadium that's in south-central England, halfway between Bristol and London, that can be used for women's international games, women's FA Cup finals, because it's the right size. And yet, can I get easy access to external funding other than going to the usual places for that? No, I can't. And I find that quite extraordinary, to be honest. And that's a frustration that I have, that there should be a provision where, for the right investment and the right infrastructure spend, smaller football clubs should have access to something that is, whether you underwrite it by the government, whether the rates are underwritten by the Treasury, I don't know, but there has to be something that achieves that. And again, I think the other point I think of the football regulator is my biggest hope is that it acts for the interests of football across the entire piece of football, be it from grassroots football right up to Champions League football. It has to act equally, and that's not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy thing to act on behalf of Manchester United and act on behalf of, let's take one, Bromley, for example, who are new into the football league this year. It's got to be able to work. It's got to have teeth, and it's got to be collaborative and communicative. It can't just be diktats from Whitehall. I pray to God that it doesn't happen like that.
The irony is, of course, Tim, when you're talking about access to financing options, that when you're in 10 years' time, when your new stadium is up and running and full every Saturday, people will be falling over themselves to offer you money to extend it again in the same way that you try and get a bank loan when you haven't got any money. It's much easier to get a bank loan when you've got money.
Unfortunately, that's absolutely the case, and I think this is almost going back to what I'm trying to say, and exactly that inevitably there are certain clubs who, we're working with some really great people to raise the finance for the new stadium. We've got some fantastic shareholders, but those clubs who don't quite have that access, there's a lot of people out there who will lend you money at a very, very high rate with very onerous conditions. Yeah. And unfortunately, some can be tempted into doing that. We don't want to be, but if the regulator was able to, do something in that area, I think it would be incredibly valuable for the whole of football.
Tim, finally, there's going to be a lot of Oxford United fans listening to this thinking, we are going to do an Ipswich this time next year. Premier League is heading our way. What's your message? I mean, this is the most exciting time of year. Once the fixtures are out and you can see that the diary's getting closer to August, it's a brilliant time of year. So what is your message for those excited Oxford United fans back in the Championship, as you say, for the first time in the best part of 3 decades?
What I will say is come to the stadium and see what a great squad we're building. We've got some really good new talent coming into the building at the moment. There's more to come. But, I'd love to do an Ipswich. I really, really would. Everybody would love to do an Ipswich. Our goal is to stay as a Championship club. That's always been the goal of our owners since they became a majority ownership a couple of years ago. They talk about this famous top 30 English club. What that really means is we want to be a stable Championship club. It's probably going to be a bit of a bumpy ride this season, if I'm being really honest. We have got some tough teams to play and we've got some very hard games. And that just means we've got to stick with it. It means we've got to accept that those games are going to be tough. It means that, in that season, we might not win as many games as we won last season, but don't get downhearted about it. Actually celebrate the fact that we will be having some of the biggest teams in the country coming to play at the Kassam Stadium, and just soak it up and enjoy it and just lean into it and just really enjoy what I hope will be the most amazing season we've had in 25 years.
Tim, thank you so much for talking to us or talking to me today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I wish you all the best for the next season to come. Absolutely my pleasure, Kevin. Really, really good to be on and good to speak to you. I know I say this every time, Kieran, but there was a lot of really interesting, genuine insight there and a lot of honesty. One thing I should mention that we didn't actually talk about too much is about the fact that the reason Oxford have to leave their grounds, the licence issues, because he didn't particularly want to talk too much about previous owners because he didn't trust himself, basically, which I understand. But there's a couple of things he said, in particular about financing the new ground, the idea of using equity and debt. He said something that you've often said, that debt isn't necessarily a bad thing. But also he spoke about fans saying, well, hang on a second, if our accounts show a £6 million loss every year, how can we afford to spend this money on a new ground? Well, his argument is that if we don't spend money on a new ground, then those annual losses will only get bigger and bigger. So it's imperative that they move now to make sure that in the future they will be breaking even.
That's right. I think you've got to try to future-proof. If we took the view that any capital expenditure was going to have a short-term negative impact on the club in terms of access to cash, then you'd have no new stadia taking place. Yeah, and we've only got to look at what's happened at Spurs and what's happened at many other clubs who have moved to bigger stadiums. It is a case of build it and they will come a lot of the time. And if Oxford have a couple of decent seasons in the Championship, there's no reason why they can't be where Luton were last season. And one of the things which hamstrung Luton was that they hadn't had the opportunity to move to a bigger stadium. So they had the downside of a lack of matchday resource, and that did have consequences for them as far as their final league position was concerned. So I think building for the future and investing in the future is something that has to be done. I've met Tim. Tim and I have been on panels together at various football functions, and he's a smart guy, and I think he's a very realistic guy as well. And he knows the things that he's done well, and he's done an awful lot of things well. And I also like the fact that he's honest enough to admit that it doesn't always work out, and you've got to hold up your hands when you get things wrong. I'd say to all fans, if you've got 100% track record at your job, in your family, in your relationships, well, fair play to you. But I don't know a single person who does that. And I'd always say, Tim's a professional. If he gets it wrong, cut these people a bit of slack, because unless you're perfect, you're in no position to sort of have a pile on, and that's one of the things that does concern me. Yes, criticism and acknowledgement is one thing, but we then move on to the next day.
Also, I mean, there are so many things I would like to pick up with you, Kieran, because I would like to have asked you during the interview. It probably would have been much longer than it was, but I was, in particular, when we talked about the regulator, and he said he's quite open about the fact that he wished there was no need for a regulator, and he thinks that the regulator's got a difficult job trying to regulate Manchester United and Colchester United in the same way is going to be difficult, and he talked about, let's hope it doesn't turn into a kind of government diktat type job. But there's a question that you wanted to ask him about things that he'd like to see in the football governance bill, extra things, and he talks in particular about how difficult it is for League One and League Two clubs to gain easy access to simple finance options, which drove so many clubs into the arms of dodgy lenders at much higher interest rates. And he talked about the idea of external funding maybe being underwritten by bonds from the EFL, so that clubs who needed money to improve infrastructure, to build a new ground, whatever, could get access to funds in a way that they're not able to now, because they're simply not considered of enough interest to investors or to banks.
Yeah, and you can understand it from a bank's point of view. Why lend money to an organisation which has volatile cash flows and is losing money on a week-by-week basis? I wouldn't do that if I was a bank manager, because I've got my job and my career to protect. I'm inclined to agree with Tim. And the Premier League does more than it actually gets credit for a lot of the time. But we were asked a question on the most recent listeners' questions show with regards to the parachute payments that don't get paid. Now, for me, that money should go into a central fund, and that should be given out in the form of grants for clubs at League One, League Two, National League level, because I think it'll be great to have greater stadiums, but also community facilities made available. And the Premier League could say with its hand on its heart, this is coming from the fact that we've now got this yo-yo scenario with regards to bounce-back clubs who are being relegated. They've got the benefit of parachute payments themselves. They've also got a Premier League squad. And as we saw, Leicester and Southampton went straight up. Leeds were very unlucky not to go straight up as well. Why not ring fence that money? It would be seen as being used for a good cause, and it would assist those clubs. Alternatively, if we've got a government regulator coming in, and I know the regulator is going to be independent of government, and that we have to stress that, I think there's a broader issue for government in terms of there's been a lack of investment in grassroots sport, and I'm not talking just football. Why can't we have something similar to what we refer to as the Export Credit Guarantee Fund, which is where the government says to encourage UK businesses to go out to new international markets. But the problem is, if I'm selling product to a new country and I'm not familiar with the legal system there, and I'm not familiar with the contract system there, the UK government says if you sell goods in good faith and the customer doesn't pay, we will step in to make sure that you don't lose out. So I think there are opportunities, and I think from central government, independent of the regulator, but also I think the Premier League, instead of the club saying, oh, look, we've got an extra £3 million each this season, fantastic, well, why can't the Premier League, even if the Premier League says we're going to give half of it, then there's still, next season I think it's £64 million is being saved by the Premier League in not giving parachute payments to Southampton and Leicester. Well, 30, if it's split it 50-50, 32 million between the 44 clubs in League One and League Two, that's 750 grand each, and you ensure that goes on to capital projects and community projects. I think it'll be a fantastic gesture.
And finally, Kieran, I know sometimes some of our more, shall we say, media savvy guests will say things that they think I want to hear. But I could have leant into the screen and kissed him when he talked about his ambition for Oxford United and the new stadium was that it's open 365 days a year for the community. And he stressed he's not talking about for corporate things. It's not open 365 days a year for them to make money, but it's open for people in the community that have needs or want company or a cup of tea to go to. It was like manna from heaven hearing a CEO of a club saying that out loud, and the cynical people say, well, of course he would, it's great PR, but it's really good to get that acknowledged, because club owners and CEOs don't always share that view, do they, about their stadium?
That's right. And football clubs open doors because we are men of a certain age, and we've got friends who have got issues that they're not very good at dealing with. I think being able to go to a football club on a Wednesday morning and meet just a bunch of other blokes, or having schemes which operate for those children who are in danger of dropping out of full-time education. Truancy rates are increasing in this country, but football clubs can open that door, and the Premier League schemes are absolutely fantastic. I think there's a very good case for local government and central government taking the power of football, because football opens doors, football starts a conversation, and having schemes which can make better communities. And that's not me being dipped in, saccharin and lovey-dum and so on. It's because they're our communities as well.
The Palace women's walking football team, who I wouldn't like to get stuck in a lift with after a hen night, they are raucous, but they're all women, none of whom knew each other 3 years ago, all had various reasons, whether it's through isolation or fitness or just to get out of the house, joined this women's football team, walking women's football team, and have just made best friends for life, and it's the most important part of their week now. And it's fantastic when you see that, and it's a very simple thing to do, to provide a little bit of space and a bit of kit and a couple of balls in the net for people to do that. It costs virtually nothing, and yet it has a remarkable effect on the physical and mental well-being of people in the community.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. Football is the new religion.
It is, yeah. Thank you to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution as well, that'd be very kind of you. It will get you access to our chat community and our regular quizzes, and you can do all that by going to patreon.com/priceoffootball. If you have a question you'd like answered on our regular Tuesday questions pod, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter X, and you can find us on our YouTube channel. And if you'd like to buy our book, which is coming out on paperback in just a few weeks' time, you can find details on our website as well, priceoffootball.com. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The Price of Football. The Price of Football.